world order with Chinese characteristics. Coming soon? We shall see. But hey, folks, it is under construction as we speak. I'm Alex Newman. This is the Alex Newman Show for Unified TV. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is actually part of a series we've been working on Communist China and what's going on there. In the first part of the series, we looked at Communist China itself, and we showed you that American elites are deliberately building up the CCP into an economic and political and military powerhouse. It's happening on both sides of the aisle. It's happening with major American businesses. Then we went back in time. We showed you that this is not a new problem. In fact, if you go all the way back to the beginning, when Chairman Mao was able to successfully conquer at least mainland China, again, we find the support of the same groups. And in many cases, the same people, right? And at the same time, they're telling us in America, oh, you got to prepare for war. The Communist Chinese, they're terrible. You know, they're doing all this bad stuff. Yeah. And who helped them? Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at this new world order that the evildoers are building. And, you know, the CCP talks a lot about socialism with Chinese characteristics. It's a clever little marketing term. It's not quite Karl Marx socialism. It's not quite Lenin or Stalin socialism. It's just a new and improved form of socialism, a socialism with Chinese characteristics. Folks, what I'm telling you here, and I think it's very easy to prove, is that we are now entering very rapidly a new world order with Chinese characteristics. I mean, in the first part of this series, 2 episodes ago, you heard George Soros talk about how Communist China needs to own the new world order. We heard Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, say that Communist China is a role model for many countries. They're dead serious about this, folks. They are dead serious about this. And this project has been under construction for a long time. So I want to start with the monetary side, right? We hear a lot about the dollar and the yuan and the IMF. Well over a decade ago, in fact, over 15 years ago now, the Communist Chinese made a really interesting proposal. The Chinese central bank chief, Xu Xiaoshan, he actually put out a public paper calling for what amounts to a global currency run by the International Monetary Fund. And if you read this report, translated into English, he says a super sovereign reserve currency not only eliminates the inherent risk of credit-based sovereign currency, but also makes it possible to manage global liquidity. This is what he said. And he talked about using the IMF and the special drawing rights for this. We'll do a whole episode one day on the move toward a one world currency. It's hugely, hugely significant. But I want to pause here for a minute, because here you have the CCP's central banker publicly proposing a super sovereign, in other words, it's not tied to any nation, reserve currency. Right now, the dollar is the global reserve currency. So what are the implications of moving toward this super sovereign, this global reserve currency? He proposes it ought to be run by the IMF. And beyond the implications, considering the fact that the U.S. dollar is currently the global reserve currency, and that brings some pretty significant benefits to the United States and to the U.S. government, you'd think the U.S. government would be horrified by this idea. But you'd be wrong. Okay? Back when this proposal was made by People's Bank of China chief Xu Xiaoshan, they asked the U.S. Treasury Secretary at the time, Timothy TurboTax Geithner, what he thought about this proposal. And in a sane world, he would have said, well, this is crazy. The U.S. dollar is a global reserve currency. Why are we talking about other reserve currencies? What's wrong with the dollar? The dollar's great. Everybody should love the dollar. Well, that's not what he said. Okay, he's sitting at the Council on Foreign Relations. You might remember them from our very first episode. And he says something fascinating when asked by a reporter about this Communist Chinese proposal. Listen up.
Chinese government proposal about a global currency and about the IMF regulations, the new IMF idea about the general agreements to borrow and having a faster ability to disperse to the emerging markets. On the first question, I haven't read the governor's proposal. He's a very thoughtful, very careful, distinguished central banker. Generally find him sensible on every issue. But as I understand his proposal, it's a proposal designed to increase the use of the IMF's special drawing rights. And we're actually quite open to that suggestion.
What? I mean, if I had coffee in my mouth, I'd be spitting it all over the screen. What do you mean you're quite open to that? I mean, does anybody stop and think about what they're saying first? I mean, do we realize the implications of the dollar losing its status as the global reserve currency? Can you say a cataclysmic decline in the purchasing price, a fundamental restructuring of the global, not just economic system, but political system, the balance of power? I mean, this is huge. Right? And so the guy says, I haven't read the proposal yet, but I love the CCP central bank. I mean, imagine him saying that about Trump or a Republican. I mean, it's just out of the question. But he says, we're quite open to that. Okay, that is pretty wild. Now, we've talked a little bit about, and we will talk more about this idea of a new world order. We've seen the Western globalists trying to build a new world order for a very, very long time. They have been announcing it publicly for many decades.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The promise and the vision of the UN's founders, right? So a world where the rule of law, we're talking about global law, will govern the conduct of nations, where we're going to use the peacekeeping forces of the UN, that means their military forces, to bring about the vision of the UN's founders. And we're going to do an episode on the UN's founders one of these days. But folks, think about that. So the Western globalists, the political leaders, the banking leaders, the business leaders have been on this bandwagon for a long time. Clinton talked about it. Joe Biden has talked about it. Barack Obama has talked about it publicly, by the way. And so what does that mean? Right. Well, let's look at these institutions that they're talking about. Let's start with the United Nations, which they're saying is at the heart of global governance. This is where the decisions are going to be made on the kinds of rules and laws that will govern the conduct of nations, as George Bush said. So let's look at what's going on there. So the UN has 15 specialized agencies. 15. Okay, they've got the UNESCO, the UN Educational and Scientific Organization. They've got cultural. They've got the High Commissioner for Human Rights. They've got the UN Environment Program. They've got the World Intellectual Property Organization. They've got the Food and Agriculture Organization, and on and on. And they've got a whole bunch of these specialized agencies. And would you be surprised if I told you that 1/3 of them are literally run by card-carrying members of the Chinese Communist Party? Okay, that's not my opinion. This is, you can look it up yourself. And even in the ones where the CCP minions don't actually run the agency as director general or whatever, they're very often deputy director general, assistant director general. So they're very often right there at the top. And then you look at like the World Health Organization with Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus from Ethiopia. He was put in there by the CCP. In fact, this is publicly acknowledged. The CCP was arm-twisting diplomats in Geneva to make sure Tedros Ghebreyesus would get voted in. And then what happened? He became a good little lapdog of the CCP. Oh, no, there's nothing to worry about with COVID. Oh, no, there's nothing to worry about with the China. There's no need to shut down travel. In fact, that's probably racist. So really interesting. Really, really interesting that so much of the UN bureaucracy is controlled by actual card-carrying members of the CCP. Okay, and just for some perspective, an American controls one of these 15 specialized agencies, even though the American taxpayer pays more than the next 180 countries combined to this whole project. Thank you for watching this report, folks. There's so much more that I'd love to dive into, but we can't, unfortunately, because we've got huge censorship from the big tech companies. So if you want to explore this topic further, check out this report and my entire library of uncensored content over at unified.tv. It's linked right below. A membership in Unified is going to give you unlimited access to hundreds of uncensored podcasts, investigative journalism, documentaries, films, and content that at one time was available on major streaming platforms like Netflix, but now is basically banned from the internet. So for just $14.99 a month, that's less than $1 a day, you're going to get access to all of it, and your subscription also helps keep the platform running free from censorship and corporate influence. So please consider supporting us and enjoy all of our unfiltered, thought-provoking content in return.